everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. There are some sounds that are just naturally unsettling. Nails on a chalkboard, children screaming, animals growling, or the sounds emitted by those tools your dentist uses. All these things we prefer not to hear. And then there's those sounds that only become unsettling given their context. Take footsteps, for example. Not scary, unless you're supposed to be alone. The sound of a door opening, no way that's scary, unless, of course, it's your home and you don't recognize the person opening it. Or one of my favorite, not scary turned scary sounds, whispering. Intention, context, they make all the difference when it comes to scary versus not. And what I've come to find is that just about everything can be terrifying, one way or another. Because even with tonight's stories, all so vastly different, they do all share one thing. They're terrifying. So, let's get started, shall we? My mom's dog, Punky, rest in peace, was a very sweet, loving dog. She was an ESA dog, but trained to be a service dog for PTSD before she lost her leg. I had never seen her get aggressive with anyone in the entire 12 years she lived. She never growled or nipped anyone, and she had no sense of smell, so she loved all animals and people. A real gentle giant among our little terriers at 60 pounds. What I'm getting at was that her barking at something and being aggressive was so wildly uncharacteristic that I only saw it once. I was 11 years old at the time, and I was at home with my siblings, 2 and 6. My then stepdad was at work, and my mom ran up to the gas station to grab a pack of cigarettes. It was only a mile or 2 away from us. For reference, we lived in a 2-bedroom trailer in the middle of the woods on a dead-end road at the time, and you had to really make an effort to get down our road, find our house, navigate down our rickety driveway, and find the door. I'm sitting at the computer, having a grand time watching YouTube videos, when all of a sudden, all of our dogs, about 2 Boston Terriers, a Chihuahua, perk up and bark a few times. And then start investigating down the hall. My siblings were napping in their bedroom at the end of the hall at the time, so I figured that they just stirred and scared the dogs. But then Punky sits up suddenly, stands up on the couch, and puffs her chest out. Her ears are perked up, her fur standing on end, her tail straight up, and then she barks, loudly. I mean, the bark booms through the living room and echoes around. All of a sudden, she lunges off the couch and goes tearing down the hallway. I'm already on edge because I don't think I've heard her bark, ever. She's a Basenji mix, so her bark is more of a baying sound, but this was a big, loud, alert bark. I stand up to go look down the hallway, ready to fight off what I'm assuming is a shadow monster in the hallway, based on how the dogs are acting. But then I hear it. Knock, knock, knock. We didn't get visitors because of how weird our house's location was, so my 11-year-old mind had no clue what to do here. The only people who showed up were family, and they didn't knock, so I slowly walked towards the door. The knock drew the attention of the dogs, and they came running back down the hallway, all except for Punky. And I felt better with all 3 of the yappy dogs in the room with me, even if they were all the size of New York City sewer rats. I opened the door just a bit, and standing on our porch is the sketchiest man I think I've ever seen. I can still picture him perfectly. He was a really thin, taller man with dark hair and a sunken face, bags under his eyes, and his half-managed hair, sort of like he just gave it a quick brush and then figured it was good enough. Everything about him seemed just a little too thin, a little too shallow. And his clothes were all off, too. They were nice, but fake nice, you know? Like a clean, newer-looking t-shirt and new jeans, but he had what looked like a suit jacket on. All of his clothes were dark, too, despite the fact that it was summer in Texas, and the weather was definitely into the hundreds that day. He also had this plain, unlabeled bottle in his hand. It looked like the label had been covered up or taped over. I stare up at him in confusion because I definitely don't know this man, and I ask what he wants. He smiles at me in this way that's way too fake, like this exaggerated and forced grin, and he spoke in the same voice retail workers do. "Hey there, kiddo. I'm trying to sell this here carpet cleaner." And he shakes the bottle at me. "Mind if I come in to show you how good it works?" Alarms are going off in my head because he just seems so off. Looking back with an adult perspective, the fact that he didn't ask if my parents were home is unnerving because he probably knew they weren't, and that's why he was here in the first place. I should have told him to get off our property, that I'd have to go get my mom, something except for what I said, but I didn't. Instead, I just shook my head and said, "No, we don't have carpet." "Well, it works on other things." And he took a big step toward the door and shook the bottle at me. I start to freak out and think to close the door, but the thing is, our front door didn't even have a lock. Small town, hard to access home. We never needed a lock, so that's basically useless. I'm sure there's something very wrong about to happen, and I'm terrified as I think about what to do in the few seconds I think I have before it does happen, when all of a sudden, I hear it. Punky had crept up from the hallway, lowered toward the ground, with her teeth bared and snarling. Like she was feral. She had slobbered just dripping from her mouth. Her ears were down, and she was ready to pounce. The guy hears it too, and as I look toward Punky, she tries to lunge past me, and I just barely catch her with my leg as she tries her hardest to duck past me and attack this guy. He freaks out and runs off the porch without another word, booking it down the driveway as I let Punky out along with the rest of our dogs, and they chase him. Our small dogs chase him down the driveway and stop about halfway, barking and jumping about, but Punky stops just on the porch and watches him with her ears perked, just staring in the distance until he disappears. I swear I saw someone join up with him, running when he got onto the road. The second he disappeared, Punky's entire body language changed, and she went back to being the sweet dog I knew, no barking or growling, just laying around, mouth and throat covered in slobber still. I realize my siblings are still down the hall, and I run to check on them. When I get to the bedroom, my siblings were sleeping soundly still, but the bedroom window was wide open, the curtains pushed all to one side, and the items on the dresser in front of the window all shoved around. Someone had tried to climb through the window, no doubt in my mind about it. From what I can gather, the bedroom window was visible from the couch where Punky was sleeping, so I think someone was trying to climb through the window before Punky went after them and scared them off, and the man at the door was meant to distract me. They definitely didn't expect Punky, a bigger dog, because most of the time she was with my mom inside, while our smaller dogs were the ones that saw public eye more often. I don't know what they intended to do, but after my mom got home, she took us to my aunt's house, and on our way there, we saw the men walking up someone else's driveway. Men, plural, because we watched a second one split off to wait by the road. So, to the two men apparently going door to door to sell their unlabeled carpet cleaner, I'd really rather not meet again. Every summer, my family and I venture north for several weeks, as do most other families in my state. The town we visited was not far from another sprawling town on a lake. Despite my overall disdain for most traffic and people, the area was pleasant most of the time. Additionally, two friends of mine also visited the area, and we would meet with each other at least 2 or 3 days out of the 2 weeks I was there. The names of my friends are Osai and Jack. We're all the same age, and we live in the same town back home, so we know one another quite well. Anyway, one evening when I rode my bike over to the general store where we would all meet, only Jack was there. For context, Jack is always 5 to 10 minutes late, and Osai was always there at least 20 minutes before me, seeing as though he could just walk from where his family's cabin was to the store. So this took me slightly by surprise. I asked Jack, "Where's Osai?" And he said, "Didn't you get the message? He said he found something and was going to take a while before he got back." I was confused when he had stated this, as I didn't remember getting a message from our group chat. But sure enough, when I opened my messages, there was one that wasn't open. The message read something along the lines of, "I'm going to be a little late. I found something really cool." So me and Jack waited for about an hour in front of the store, just waiting for Osai. And he finally shows up, but he didn't have his bike, which I found downright weird, seeing as though he cherished that thing. Before we could say anything to Osai, he immediately said, "You guys have to check out this building I found. Come on, let's go." I asked him where his bike was, and he just responded with, "It's back at my cabin. You'll probably want to leave your bikes here if you want to get to the place I found." So we obliged. We chained up our bikes to a lamppost. We followed Osai down the main road until we came up to a gravel side street with a no outlet sign. Osai pointed to the gravel road and said, "Down here. It's going to be past the end of the road, so expect some hiking." When we came into the gravel road, I noticed nearly instantly that there were very few homes on this road, which was bizarre for such a well-populated area at the time of year that we were visiting. About a quarter of a way down this decrepit and unkept road, at least by Osai's measurement, Jack asked what this building was that Osai had found, and Osai responded by saying it was an abandoned and odd-looking gray brick building with a metal roof shaped like a half circle, similar to a greenhouse. I asked if he entered the building yet, and Osai said that he tried the front door, but it got stuck on something. After Osai had said this, Jack asked if Osai knew for certain that this building was abandoned. Osai responded by saying that some of the windows were broken, and the entire back end of the house next to it was destroyed. After Osai had mentioned this, we all agreed that if we can get into this facility, we can make it a hideout where Osai and Jack could smoke, seeing as though I don't, but I thought it would be fun to have that sort of thing, nonetheless. After about another hour of walking, we finally reached the end of the road. At this point, it was 7 o'clock in the evening, and it was becoming noticeably darker under the canopy of trees on this essentially destitute road, so I was beginning to have second thoughts. But I kept my mouth shut because Osai wasn't the best person to argue with, if you catch my meaning. So we proceeded into the woods for what I guess was about a mile when we stumbled into a clearing with a big bungalow-style house and the building that Osai described to us to the left of it. We waited for give or take 3 minutes to see if the coast was clear, and then we made our way to the building. Osai's discernment almost precisely fit the appearance of the facility. It was roughly 10 feet tall, with a curved roof made from sheet steel, not unlike you'd find on barns or utility sheds. Osai was now excited, and when he went up to the door, he motioned for us to help him open it. So that's just what we did, and to this day, I regret ever going anywhere near that clearing. We opened the door with relative ease, but what came next was completely unexpected. Something fell from the table blocking the door, and it sounded vaguely wet, and when Osai had shined his flashlight in the general direction of where the sound had occurred, we saw, and I'm not joking, a severed alligator head with strings of flesh and muscle still attached to it. At about this time, the smell of the interior hit all of us, and I vomited, with Osai and Jack proceeding to gag. Mind you, we were in a place nowhere near a natural habitat for alligators, about 1,000 miles to be more exact. So this was beyond weird, to just find the head of one laying in a building on the other side of the continent. Osai, being as stubborn as ever, shined his light even further into the building, and all we saw were pieces of various reptiles all over the place. We had also seen syringes and vats on a long table, along with blood smeared across most of the surfaces that were covered with a multitude of reptile parts. At that moment, we opted to get out of there. Jack whispered, "What the f?" At this, Osai and I turned to where Jack was looking and found that one of the lights was on in one of the downstairs rooms of this seemingly abandoned house, and someone was walking to the front door. What looked to be a man stepped out and issued a nearly deafening scream that sent us running through the woods back to the road. None of us mentioned what happened to our parents. It's been 5 years since this ensued, and not a day has passed where I don't think about it. I grew up in the backwoods of rural Maine. I met my wife, then girlfriend, in high school. My father built our house from the ground up on land acquired from my grandfather. Some strange happenings have happened in those woods, but those are stories for another time. My wife's childhood home was an 1820s farmhouse that was set on a desolate street near a mountain. She had relatively close neighbors, but all was usually pretty quiet. No street lights on the street, and the vast majority of sound came from the frogs in the woods. She'd always told me odd and strange happenings occurring at the home, but I always kind of just dismissed them. Her parents moved to Florida for work, and her brother was already in the military stationed on the other side of the continent. So her parents allowed her and I to rent the property so that the house could remain taken care of. I worked a night job from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. at a halfway house, and my girlfriend worked at a local pizza shop during the day, so we only had weekends together, which was fine. I always made it a point to call her whenever I arrived at work, just to make sure she was good. On one night in particular, it took a turn for the stuff of nightmares. I called and she picked up the phone in hysterics, talking about people being in the home, walking around downstairs and talking amongst themselves, all men. The line was oddly staticky, and I could hear our 2 dogs growling in the background. I told my employers of the situation, and they told me to go. I remained on the phone for the remainder of my frantic drive home. She was very obviously upset. I was about 20 minutes from the house, but this particular commute felt like hours. As I neared the house, about 5 minutes out, I started to hear men whispering into the phone, but her reassuring me that no one was in the room with her. Then, what I feared the most, a loud crash through the phone, a blood-curdling scream from my girlfriend, and the dogs going berserk. I'm 2 seconds from the driveway, and I tried to calmly ask what had just happened. She was still on the line, luckily, and she said that she didn't know, just that it had come from her brother's room next to hers. As I pulled into the dirt driveway, I saw no other vehicles besides hers. I asked her if the men were still there, and she told me that she could still hear them talking. I told her I was coming in with something blunt. I swept through the house, quietly but quickly. Nothing. I go upstairs to where her and her brother's room were, to see her in the bed with the dogs in an extremely defensive stance. I told her the house was clear and asked what the bang was. She pointed to her brother's room, to which I slammed open the door, but was met with resistance toward the end. His AC unit was lodged into the drywall. This was a fairly heavy window unit, and it was in his window prior to this incident. The window was now a good 12 feet from where it currently rested, in the sheetrock. From that night forward, I always felt watched, and that I was never alone in that house, until we moved, and I myself joined the military. Her parents have since sold the house, but I'll never forget the oddities that took place there on a pretty frequent basis. A couple years back, when I was a teen, I was driving up a canyon out in Desheen, a small town in Utah. It was the middle of the day, the sun was out, and there were only spotty clouds. The road I was using was pretty isolated, but not totally out of the way. Every once in a while, I would pass an oil rig off to the side of the road, and occasionally a small house or a couple of cows, which would be further back from where I was driving. There weren't any trees blocking my line of sight, and any shrubbery was either just scraggly juniper bushes or grass that would barely reach past our ankles. Again, Utah. I was enjoying the drive a lot, because for me, driving time is me time. I was looking around, taking in the scenery, when I saw something to my right. About 75 feet back, standing near an oil rig, was a person. At first, I didn't think anything of it. There have to be people to occasionally maintain an oil rig. But then I looked closer, and what I saw was anything but human. It had 2 legs, 2 arms. But that's where the similarities stopped. It looked like it was made out of black scribbles, like if you took a pen and randomly scribbled across a sheet of paper. In between the black scribbles were stark white. I could not see anything through the creature. Its arms were long enough to reach mid-calf, and it didn't quite have normal hands. Instead, it looked like branches twisting off the main trunk of its arms. It didn't really have a head or a neck. Instead, it just had a slight hump rising from the top of its torso. At the front of the hump, it had eyes of a sort, but it was more like 2 blank spots where the scribbles didn't cross, leaving 2 blank white circles. It was hunched over, but even then, I could tell it was big. It reached about 1/3 of the way up the oil rig. I saw this thing in pure daylight. I wasn't sleepy, and I'd only been on the road for about an hour and a half before I saw that thing. I made complete eye contact with it, but it didn't necessarily make me feel scared, just uneasy. Has anyone else seen anything like this? Or did teen me just have a split-second flash of insanity? Also, the black scribbles that made up the creature were constantly writhing. I think I saw a ghost once. I was pretty young and it was late at night. Young, tired, dark room, old house. So I could have just imagined it, but I saw a figure, lighter than a person should have been in that light, eerily quiet, and dressed in something that resembled a 40s suit. He came out of my closet, which were also the stairs to the attic. He walked across the end of my bed towards the door, stopped, and kind of looked in my direction. He sat on the corner of my bed, sort of looking at his feet. He looked like he let out a sigh, got up, walked through the door. As soon as he passed through the door, the phone rang. I had a ghost experience in my last house. I was 13, and my bedroom was on the bottom floor of my raised ranch house. The rest of my family had bedrooms upstairs. The very first night I slept down here, it was extremely eerie, and I always had the feeling that something or someone was watching me. I'd had weird things happen every now and then, like hearing footsteps, random knocks, things moved, etc. Maybe 2 months later, I go to sleep one night. I've turned off all the lights, shut the door, and I've fallen asleep. I woke up at 2 a.m. with every single hair on my body standing up, and I immediately noticed the light outside my door is on, and my bedroom door is open. I turn over slowly, and I start to hear footsteps which sound like they're in front of my room, walking down the hall. So I'm terrified, staring at my open doorway with the light on, hearing these footsteps, and I hear 2 jiggles on the locked door down the hall. Not a doubt in my mind what the sound was. I use that door every day, and that door leads to the garage, which was closed, so it was jiggled from the inside. To this day, I've never felt as absolutely fucking petrified as I was when I heard this. I literally couldn't move. Then I heard the footsteps again, maybe 5 or 6 of them, walk over from the door, back to in front of my room. I could just feel a presence there. I was aware of what was happening. I did what any 13-year-old would do. I turned over slowly to the wall, closed my eyes hard as I could, and forced myself to sleep. I eventually moved out of the house, but goddamn, never experienced anything like that before or since. 5 years later, I come to find out that the grandfather of the family who lived in my house before us died in the downstairs bedroom that I was living in. Quite some time ago, when my niece was 4, she's 8 now, she'd said something quite odd. My sister and brother-in-law had gotten an adorable puppy. He was a bit rambunctious, but still cute as heck. But when playing with the dog one day, I was sitting on the sofa with my sister, who was pregnant with her 3rd child, one who I'd had a prophetic dream about, a different post a while ago. My niece told us that she had had a dog before. My sister and I looked at one another. I spoke to my niece. "Did you? Was your dog like Bobby?" She replied, "No, my dog before was bigger and not naughty." And then she said the weirdest part. "My grandson got him for me to keep me company when my husband died." My sister asked her what she meant. "My husband died and my grandson got me a dog." She wasn't even looking at us when she spoke. She was focused on rubbing the dog's belly. She just said it like it was fact. She didn't give any names, but that evening, she said there was a ghost upstairs waiting for her to join him. She said it was George, but she wasn't ready to go upstairs with him yet. Just really weird. This story happened about 2 years ago when I was 19 and my foster sister Kira was 16. For the sake of the story, it's important to know that I was female presenting and hadn't come out as trans yet, nor was I presenting myself in an overtly masculine style at the time. It was the summer before I was going to college, and I mostly lived with my mom and Kira, except every other weekend, where I'd stay with my dad. Now, summers where I am can get really hot and humid, so we had a habit of waiting to walk the dogs until 6 or 7 p.m., because that's when it would be cooler but still light outside. On this particular evening, Mom wasn't going to be home until late, though I don't remember the exact reason why. She's a woman that likes to stay busy and often participates in choirs, Bible studies, youth group events, classes, and more. So it wasn't uncommon for Kira and I to be left at home alone until 8 or 9 p.m. So it was up to me and Kira to walk the dogs by ourselves, unless we wanted our younger dog Samson to throw tantrums due to pent-up energy. Even though we lived in the countryside and could have walked them down our street, Kira and I decided to drive out 20 minutes to our park instead. Why? I don't remember. It could have been anything from being bored walking our dogs to not wanting to have to deal with blind curves and hills. Whatever the reason, at around 7:30 p.m., Kira and I harnessed our 2 dogs, packed them up in the car, and drove to the park. Let me quickly explain the layout of the park so it's easier to understand why we got nervous halfway through our walk. This park isn't very big, but it's popular because it's a loop. The entire park is surrounded by a mile-long looping road with its attractions like playgrounds, ponds, and a small country hall, all spaced about in the inner side of the loop. The outer side is just grass, trees, and one playground at its end. Thus, it's common and expected to pass people walking the loop at least 2 times if you're walking in opposite directions, but not if you're walking in the same direction, obviously. Any cars on this road can only drive in one direction because it's a one-way road. At first, everything about this walk was normal. I parked the car, we clipped our dogs to leashes, and we started on the loop. Every so often we'd stop so I could take pictures of our good boys, particularly of Kira trying to wrangle Samson, who pulls like his life depends on it and weaves around because he wants to smell everything. It was while I was taking one of these pictures that the first encounter happened. A man who looked to be in his 40s walked past us, walking in the same direction we were, up towards the playground on the outer side of the loop. He smiled at Kira, nodded, said hello or cute dogs, something like that, and kept walking. I honestly didn't think anything of it. We're at a park at a time of day where it's common to walk around due to the cooler temperatures, and people where I am are generally friendly. Smiling and saying hi is pretty normal, no matter who says it. We smiled back, maybe said hi or thanks depending on what he said, and that was that. Or so we thought. This man passed us again only 10 minutes later, directly across from where we'd seen him previously, just like he did before. He smiled and said, "Hi." This time, Kira and I looked at each other once he was ahead of us and shared a, well, that was weird, expression. Just 10 minutes earlier, he had passed us walking up toward the playground and subsequently broke off from the loop, and he'd been walking in the same direction as us. This time, though, he'd cut in front of us, and he did it in a way where we had to stop to avoid running into him. Hell, he nearly touched Kira with how close he was walking. This was already weird in and of itself. The other weird part was him cutting past us in the opposite direction. The only way he could have done that was if he'd cut across the inside of the loop, since it would have been close to impossible to pass us at a certain point from the other direction if he decided to walk the opposite way of the loop than us. It came off almost like he wanted to walk by us again. But just like before, Kira and I brushed this weirdness off. The guy could have been enjoying a rambling stroll and doing his own thing for all we knew. Besides, we had 2 reasonably sized dogs with us. Who'd mess with us? Not even 5 minutes later, this same man passed us again, once again, cutting so close past us that he nearly brushed shoulders with Kira. Again, he smiled and said, "Hi," before walking off. This was officially the moment I decided we needed to leave. Sure, it's normal to pass a person at least 2 times walking this loop if you're going in the opposite directions, but doing so takes a while. You have to at least get to the parallel spot on the loop from where your paths first intersected to see each other again. But the time between running into the guy and the location we passed each other didn't match up in a way that didn't look suspicious. Plus, I really wasn't a fan of how he cut across us. The first time, he passed us like a normal person walking faster than us would, albeit a little close. The second time, he cut in front of us from the opposite direction instead of walking around us, to the point where we had to stop to avoid running into him. This third time, he walked up behind us, then did this weird directionally slant walk to cross the street and go in the opposite direction, cutting us off again. So yeah, I told Kira to hustle so we could get to our car and get out instead of doing a second loop. So that's what we did. When we were almost to our car, we noticed a car creeping along behind us. We pulled to the side and stopped to let it pass. But for a second, it stopped too. We figured he was getting ready to park, so we started walking again. The car started creeping along behind us soon after we did. So we stopped again, and the car stopped with us. This was when Kira got nervous. We hadn't seen the middle-aged guy since the third cutoff, so we figured I'd overthought the whole thing. But here we were, with this tinted window car, acting weird as hell. Was it the same guy back with his car? A different guy? We couldn't tell. Before anything could happen, though, another car idled up to the one next to us, and whoever it was sped up to the expected 5 miles per hour. We got to our car pretty fast after that, and practically picked up the dogs to get them inside of the car. We got in and got out of there. My mistake, however, was neglecting my rearview mirror and the wide advised rule to not drive straight home if you're worried a stranger's taken too much interest in you. I was anxious, dumb, and primarily concerned with getting home where we could be safe. Because home is safe, right? Nothing bad is supposed to happen to you there, right? My naive false sense of security. I think we got home around 8-something. The sun had finally disappeared behind the horizon, but it wasn't fully dark yet. Just that dusty purple color the sky gets before it finally accepts that it's nighttime. Mom wasn't home yet, so we got the dogs some water, locked the doors, ate a late dinner, and chilled in the living room, talking about things that didn't really matter. It was almost 9:30 when the scariest part of the whole ordeal happened. There, Kira and I were, sitting on different couches, talking about something or other, when we noticed the ceiling briefly light up over where Kira was sitting. An important note here is that Kira is sitting on a small couch with her back to a window that faces the front of the house, while I was on a couch on the opposite wall where I could see a sliver of the front porch. Likewise, right next to Kira was our front door, which has 3 small rectangular windows on it. Due to our long, slightly curvy driveway, it's common to see headlights stream through that window, light up the ceiling, fade, and then intensify. It means someone's just come home. So when the ceiling above Kira lit up, we thought nothing of it, assuming Mom was finally coming back from wherever she had been that night. And we didn't take any notice of the light skipping the final arc of somebody pulling up the driveway either. We also didn't pay any mind to how long it was taking Mom to come inside. Mom has a habit of pulling in and then checking her phone for God knows how long before coming inside. After a couple of minutes, I noticed the small motion sensor light that Mom set up on a table on the porch lights up. Again, I could only see a sliver of the space based on my position and the curtains. Basically, I could see a smidge of the table and the rails bordering the porch, but not the stairs or anything approaching the door, depending on how they approached it. I wasn't paying much attention either, because I assumed it was my mom. Right after the light went off, we both heard the storm door open, but we didn't hear anyone pressing the code keys of our lock or jiggling the door handle, like Mom usually does right away. The moment the storm door creaked open, our 2 dogs jumped up and ran to the door, barking like mad. Our golden greyhound mix Calvin has a deep, scary bark, which contradicts his adorable appearance. Samson, our dumb goofball son, who is incapable of hurting a fly, but a big boy, jumps up on his hind legs and scrambles to find a perch on one of the small windows in a desperate attempt to see who's outside. Immediately, the storm door slammed shut, and we heard heavy footsteps on the cement of our porch. Calvin started going nuts and jumped up on Kira's couch, standing on its back instead of the cushions to look out the window. Samson ran out of the room and went out the doggy door that leads to the back porch, which has a ramp going down into a fenced portion of our yard. I couldn't move. I never understood, really, what it meant when people described their limbs turning to lead until that moment. It felt like I didn't have limbs, really. Like moving wasn't an option. If I moved, I might glimpse something or someone through the windows. The person could see me running around the house, freaking out, and decide to come after us after all. So I sat there, my mind steadily going blank as my heart sped up and limbs refused to move. In the game of fight, flight, or freeze, I'm the freezer. Kira, on the other hand, is a fighter. She spins around and looks out the window, but can't see anything because besides the motion light on the porch, it's too dark. So naturally, she gets up, grabs a stray dog toy, which just so happens to be a tug-of-war rope with a ball on one end, and opens the door. I tell her very calmly to shut the door and stay inside. She ignored me and stepped out onto the porch. She comes back inside after not seeing anything, but to my utter disbelief, she disappears to the kitchen and comes back with a knife and goes outside again. This time, she's gone for a handful of seconds before running back inside and slamming the door shut. Breathless, she tells me that she went out a bit into the yard and she saw the outline of a man by the rundown dog kennel we don't use anymore. When she saw him and froze, he moved. This time, she listened to me when I told her to lock the door. I managed to call Mom despite my head being empty and my limbs being lead, and she convinced me to get up, make sure all of the doors were locked, including the basement, and make sure the dogs were inside. I ended up making Kira go into the fenced-up section to drag Samson back inside because I couldn't get my legs to move after thinking about doing it myself. Cowardly, I know. After Mom got home and looked around, finding nothing, We called the non-emergency number for the police, not wanting to bother them in case we were overreacting. 2 cops came by and walked around our yard and found nothing. We got the sense they didn't believe us, but instead saw us as 2 overexcited girls with exaggerated imaginations. Still, they humored us and told us, after we told them about the park, that if I think anyone might be following us, or if someone's acting a little too creepy, not to drive straight home and to check if anyone's following us. Then they left. To this day, I'm pretty sure the only people who believe someone with malicious intent came to our home in hopes of finding 2 teenage girls is Kira and me. Though, whether or not whoever it was the guy from the park, we're not sure. But it's too coincidental, isn't it? That the same day we have multiple encounters with this guy who goes out of his way to get close to us, a car inch along behind us, that we also have an almost intruder encounter. Plus, there were too many details that didn't add up to us having overly excited imaginations. We both saw headlights, the motion detector on the porch turned on, the storm door opened and stayed open until Samson jumped up to look out the door's window. It's a very noisy door, and it makes sounds when opening and closing. We heard footsteps. Kira saw someone. And the dogs don't run up to the door like that and bark their heads off if no one's there. I don't know if whoever was at our house was the same guy that ran into us at the park. If it was, I don't know if the reason he cut in front of us as close as he did was to test how our dogs would react to him. And them not caring at all, or the first time wagging their tails, convinced him that they weren't a threat. I don't know if he was in the car that inched behind us and stopped when we stopped. I don't know what would have happened if Calvin didn't have a scary, manic bark, or if Samson wasn't tall enough to look out the high windows on the door. I don't know much of anything. What I do know is this. If you're out and about, minding your own business, and a stranger is taking a lot of notice of you, following you, frequently running into you, or whatever, trust your gut. Don't drive or walk straight home. Meander, go to a public space, or just take your time. Pay attention to your surroundings. You never know who's watching you. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode, but be sure to join me every Friday night for a brand new one. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a huge thanks to all of you for listening. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to The Darkest Hour if you haven't already, and tap the bell so you never miss a thing. I really appreciate all of it, and I can't thank you enough. Huge shout out to all of my patrons for their unwavering support. MISANTHROPIA, Shane Q, Monica L, The Dark Cosmos, ZOEWATT, Shelly B, Donald C, Rat Girl, ALISHA S, and ERIN G. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. or click the link in the description to learn more. You can keep up with me and all things Darkest Hour over on my Instagram, @thedarkesthouryt, or if you prefer, follow me on Twitter, at AmandaJaneTDH. And do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me. amandadarkesthour@gmail.com or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.